Let me start with a confession. I blame the movies, the scene, a starship drifting toward a shimmering whirlpool in space, the captain shouting something dramatic, the soundtrack swelling like the universe itself is holding its breath. Then, the ship stretches like taffy, bends, twists, and vanishes into a cosmic drainpipe, a wormhole. I saw those scenes a lot. Maybe you did too. But here is the thing, the real physics is stranger than the movies. Not louder, not flashier, just stranger. Because the real story is not about spaceships. It's about geometry, about what space is, about whether the universe has directions we cannot point to, about whether wormholes are not tunnels at all, but shadows of something higher dimensional. And that's where our journey begins. Let me take you back to 1935. Einstein and his collaborator Nathan Rosen were the problem. The equations of general relativity predicted singularities, places where the math blew up. They wondered, could a particle be modeled not as a point, but as a kind of tunnel in space-time? And so they wrote a paper describing what we now call the Einstein-Rosen bridge, a mathematical structure that looks like a throat connecting two sheets of space-time. Not a scientific fiction portal, not a shortcut for travelers, just a weird, elegant solution to the equations. But here is the twist. The bridge pinches off instantly. If you tried to cross it, you would never make it. The geometry collapses faster than light could traverse it. It's like a door that slams shut the moment you try to open it. So the original wormhole was non-traversable, a ghost of a tunnel, a mathematical mirage. Then here is the question, can a wormhole be held open? Physicists are stubborn creatures. We looked at that collapsing bridge and said, okay, but what if we held it open? And that's where things get wild. To keep a wormhole open, to make it traversable, you need something that violates the usual rules of energy, something with negative energy density, something exotic. We do know negative energy exists in tiny amounts. The Casimir effect produces it between closely spaced metal plates. Quantum fields can dip below zero energy in special circumstances. But these are microscopic, delicate effects. Nothing like the colossal, stable negative energy you would need to prop open a wormhole throat wide enough for a person, let alone a spaceship. So traversable wormholes are not ruled out by the laws of physics, but they demand ingredients we do not yet know how to produce in bulk. But now, let's shift gears, because the real magic of wormholes is not the travel, it's the perspective shift. Imagine a creature living in a perfectly flat, two-dimensional world, a sheet of paper. This creature, let's call her Lynn, can move forward or backward and left or right, but not up or down. Up or down does not exist for her. It is not just inaccessible, it's inconceivable. Now imagine you, a 3D being, push your finger through the sheet. What does Lynn see? Not a finger. She sees a circle that appears out of nowhere, grows, shrinks, and vanishes. She experiences only the 2D slice of your 3D presence. Now imagine you fold the sheet so two distant points touch. To Lynn, it looks like teleportation. To you, it's just geometry. This is the analogy physicists use when we talk about wormholes. A wormhole might not be a tunnel in our space. It might be a shortcut through a higher spatial dimension, a direction we cannot point to, just as Lynn cannot point. Up. This does not directly prove the universe literally has a fourth spatial dimension we can walk into. But mathematically, wormholes behave as if our 3D world is embedded in something larger, and the wormhole is a path through that larger structure. Let's ask the question directly. Is there a spatial dimension we cannot experience? The honest answer is, maybe. Physics does not forbid it. In fact, some theories, like string theory, require extra spatial dimensions for the math to work. These dimensions could be curled up, tiny, hidden, or they could be large but inaccessible to our senses, the way a fish in a pond might never realize the air above it exists. But here, the philosophical punch. Even if a fourth spatial dimension exists, our brains evolved to navigate a 3D world. We are built to see length, width, height, not whatever lies beyond. So if wormholes are shadows of higher dimensional geometry, we might never perceive that geometry directly. We would only see its projections, its footprints, its distortions, the way Lynn sees only the slice of your finger. This is where physics brushes against philosophy. Not mysticism, just humility. A recognition that our sensory apparatus is not the measure of reality. Now let me tell you about one of the boldest ideas in modern theoretical physics. In 2013, we proposed something called ER equals EPR. The idea is simple to state. ER stands for Einstein-Rosen bridges. That is wormhole. EPR stands for Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen. That is quantum entanglement. The conjecture says every pair of entangled particles is connected by a tiny quantum scale wormhole. Not a wormhole you could travel through, not a scientific fiction, but a geometric way of describing the same underlying connection that quantum mechanics describes as entanglement. If this idea is right, then wormholes are not rare. They are everywhere. Every entangled particle pair, and there are countless such pairs, would be connected by a microscopic Einstein-Rosen bridge, or a wormhole. This is speculative. Yes, but it's mathematically consistent with certain models of quantum gravity, and it hints at something profound. Space itself might be woven from quantum connections. Now, what do wormholes actually teach us about the nature of reality? First, they teach us that distance is not absolute. 2 points that seem far apart in our 3D world might be adjacent in a higher 3D-dimensional embedding. Just as Lynn's world can be folded, our universe might have hidden shortcuts. Second, they teach us that our perception is not the full story. We evolved to navigate a narrow slice of reality. Wormholes remind us that the universe may have layers, directions, and structures we cannot directly sense. Third, they teach us that geometry and physics are inseparable. A wormhole is not a thing. That's a shape the universe could take under the right conditions, a shape that challenges our intuition about what space is. And finally, they teach us something fundamental. Reality may be larger than the part we can experience. We are not looking at reality. We are looking at reality, shadow on the wall of our perceptual cave. Plato imagined prisoners chained in a cave, watching shadows on the wall, believing the shadows were real. The task was to turn people around, force them to look at the fire, to walk out of a cave, to see the sun. 24 centuries later, theoretical physics finds itself in a strangely similar position. The equations of general relativity are showing us the shape of the cave wall. Quantum mechanics is showing us the flickering of the fire. But the thing that casts the shadow, the fundamental structure from which space-time emerges, that remains beyond our direct experience. We humans like to think we see the world as it is, but wormholes whisper, no, you see the world as your senses allow. A 2D creature cannot imagine the direction of up. We cannot imagine the fourth spatial direction, not necessarily because it does not exist, but because our brains were never built to. And that's the beauty of physics. It gives us tools to see beyond our evolutionary design. It lets us glimpse structures we cannot visualize, dimensions we cannot inhabit, geometries we cannot touch. Wormholes are not promises of travel, they are invitations to humility. Take a breath. Imagine the universe as a vast, flexible fabric. Imagine that fabric folding, stretching, curving. Imagine 2 distant stars touching like 2 points on a sheet, brought together. Now imagine that this folding happens not in our space, but in a direction we cannot point to, a direction as real as length or height, but forever hidden from our senses. That's the wormhole perspective. That's why, when people ask me why I study wormholes, I do not talk about starships or shortcuts. I talk about perspective. Wormholes force us to confront the possibility that the observable universe is not the whole story, that what we call space is just a part of reality our senses can grasp. A wormhole is a reminder that the universe is under no obligation to be intuitive. It is under no obligation to fit inside our mental furniture. It is vast, layered, dimensional in ways we may never fully experience. But we can imagine, we can model, We can listen to the equations whispering about bridges and folds and hidden directions, and in that listening, we become a little more than creatures of 3 dimensions. We become explorers of the possible. So the next time you see a wormhole in a movie, a one that is swirling, glowing, dramatic, you can smile, not because it's realistic, but because it points to something deeper, a universe stranger, richer, and more beautiful than fiction ever dared. And somewhere, in the quiet geometry of space-time, the equations are still whispering,